It's a mystery of this hope in me. How you hold the stars, yet you hold my heart. One who's first and last, wiped away my past. Perfect royal
All right, welcome to this Sunday morning service online, SFN Church of God. It is January 31st,
Yes.
2021.
And it's cold. 21, you got it.
It's cold.
Sure.
We're not used to this. I mean, this is normal. This should have happened back in the heart of December and end of November, but I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining at all.
No, it is January. Almost done January.
Oh, it is,
So
yep.
spring's coming.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. We just want to take the time to welcome you for tuning in. Thank you so much. We just value you being a part of what we're doing here. We're navigating through the situation that's in front of us, and so
Yes.
we're glad that you're part of it too.
Yeah,
And we're
glad
so
you're
grateful.
connecting with us today.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Hey, we're going to jump right into it. We've been spending a few Sundays now talking about Joseph and the dynamics of his life and possibly in his brother's life and all those different dynamics.
Dysfunctional family at the core,
Yep.
but we had some powerful things we found in there.
And one of the things we want to tell you,
And-
if you haven't seen the last two Sundays, we would encourage you just to jump on to our YouTube channel,
Yes.
Estevan Church of God,
Yeah.
and look at the previous two messages because we're
Yes.
kind of going the same theme or same direction.
Yes.
And I think to be honest with you, this is probably one of the most important ones, I think, because it really hits here.
Yes.
And it was birthed a lot out of our own experiences as we've been
Yes.
navigating through stuff. And so
Yes.
we want to encourage you and we want to give you
Yes.
hope as we talk through this subject.
So what are we talking about
What are we
today,
talking about?
honey?
We're talking about flipping your story.
Yes.
And the subtitle of that was Flipping Your Story because God uses us in the midst of our journey.
Yes. You know what? I was gonna call it flipping your flop because that's kind of our journey sometimes, and I thought that was a little bit funny, so I just thought I had to put it out there. But is flipping your story?
That's right, because
Yes.
all of us have a story, and sometimes we allow our story,
Yeah.
which is our experiences, are the things that affected us, things that have, resulted in often the direction that we go.
Yes.
And we think that defines us. And so we want to flip that story for you
Yeah.
this morning because we want to alleviate the pressure of trying to perform, trying to be something that you think earns his attention and his blessing. And what we want to do, we want to flip that story because
Yes.
God uses us in our mess, in our journey.
And you know what? I feel like actually the whole Bible is people's story of how God uses them.
And I mentioned that last
In
time,
their journey.
didn't I? About this book is about
Yes.
people
Yeah.
that have walked through the journey of life. And many times I think we've fallen into the pressure because we're in ministry, because we're in
Yeah.
church leadership and stuff like that. We often have faced the pressure that we've had to perform a certain way.
Yes.
We needed to have our ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we start up ministry, we live that way.
Yeah.
And we put immense amount of pressure on us that we had to have our ducks in a row. We had to have our life in check
Yeah.
in order for God to use
Yeah.
us. And the Lord, and that life led to just being fake, not real.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we stay where we're at because it doesn't matter. It
No.
does matter, but we have
Yes.
to understand that process, God uses us in our mess.
Yes.
And Jacob is a prime example of how God uses us in our mess. And we talked about Joseph
Yeah.
and his brothers, and now we want to talk about Jacob and bring this story together.
And Jacob was Joseph's dad.
Yes.
So we're going back a little bit in that timeline. But our purpose today is we want to challenge some of the belief systems that have held us back
Yes.
and hostage to being free and enjoying our journey
Yes.
with God before we have our crap together, while we're trying to figure it out, while we're flopping
Because
in the
the
process.
reality is,
Yes.
nobody has it together.
What?
Sometimes we can give the perception,
Yes.
oh, we're just got it together and we're got this in order and that
Yeah.
in order and that in order.
Yeah.
And that's why God is able to use us because we have things in order. But when you go into the scripture and you hear the stories and account of men and women that God
Yes.
used,
Yes.
that was not the case.
They-
And that gives us hope and that gives
Yes.
you hope
Yes.
that God uses you in the midst of the chaos,
Absolutely.
midst of the process, in the
Yeah.
midst of not having it all together. So we want you to grab a coffee,
Yes.
relax, join the conversation with
Yes.
us, and be free
Yeah.
because it's going to be fun this morning. It's
Yeah.
going to be fun this
It's
morning.
going to be a little bit fun.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's start
So,
with Jacob.
yes.
In Genesis 25, I believe,
Yep,
his story starts to begin and
That's right.
unfold. And,
Yep.
and the amazing thing about Jacob's life is, right from the time he was born, he felt like he was behind the curve.
Yeah,
he was
behind the eight ball.
behind the 8 ball. He never was enough, right to the point, because
Yep.
him and his brother Esau were born at exactly the same time. They were twins.
Twin brothers.
And before they were born,
Yes.
it was prophesied that Jacob would be the name that would carry the nation of Israel. God would
Yes.
use him.
Yes.
And in the midst of the whole thing about birth and whatever happened,
And you know what it said there? These two brothers, they were fighting in the womb before they were even born.
That's right.
They both wanted to be first in line, and Jacob lost out. He lost out. He was grabbing his brother's heel as they were coming out. That's what it says. And
Yes.
they named him Jacob because it means to be behind.
or grabbing things by the heel.
Yeah, but that's how he felt.
All through Jacob's life, if you start reading from Genesis 25 on,
Yeah.
you get the picture that Jacob was always feeling like he was playing catch up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can relate to that, but I can relate to that on many, many angles. You just feel like you're always playing catch up. And
Yes.
that was Jacob's story. That's why it's important we need to understand that we can flip that story, because it doesn't have to define our journey.
Yes.
And sometimes it does. And we
Yes.
want to be able to walk through
Yes.
this to
Yeah.
give you 3 principles that can help you navigate through your journey
Yes.
and rejoice in the process, even though you don't have your stuff together.
Yes, because we've struggled with this.
Absolutely, we
and
have.
we have
without a
learned
doubt.
and still learning, but we have learned to release some of the pressure.
Absolutely.
Because that can kill you.
Absolutely. And
Oh
it
my
did. It
goodness.
train wrecked us.
Yeah, totally.
As 2 people in ministry,
Yeah.
trying to lead a church at the time, trying to
Yeah.
have the perception that everything was together.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you folks, we can tell you from honest heart, that kind of living in that kind of system, it has the perception of you have it together, but really deep down you know you don't. You don't have all your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And you're striving always to have those things together because there's an expectation on you.
Yeah.
And as we navigated through our life, we just kept hitting corner after corner after corner,
Yeah.
devastated because what we thought we were trying so hard to obtain was causing us to end up dead-end roads. And it just led to despair
Yes.
and questioning your faith, questioning how God works, and rearranging all this stuff.
Yes.
And in the midst of that, God began to show us the real
Yes.
Jesus
Yes.
and began to transform our
Yes,
perspective.
and he began to challenge everything we believed because, you know what, I just want to bring Jacob's story into the forefront because we can relate a lot to him.
We can.
And because he felt like he knew what God's promise was to him. He knew it. He was told it from young on. But he thought he had to manipulate to actually get the promises of God. Otherwise, he would miss out. Like, have you ever felt like that? If I don't do it right, I've got to manipulate somebody because I'm going to miss out what God has for
Absolutely.
me. That's an awful feeling.
It is. From
So-
experience.
Yeah, so he lied, he cheated, he manipulated his whole life because he figured he was going to miss out.
And even when it came to the point where he was looking for a wife,
Yeah.
he felt he lost out because when he fell in love with Rachel.
Yeah.
Rachel was the move of his heart, and he began to build relationship with her father and her family and said, that's who I want to marry. And then he got married. He had a wedding ceremony. And in Hebrew, Jewish history,
Yeah.
you know, the coverings were all there. And so he did not realize till the very next day after he slept with so-called Rachel,
Yeah.
and it was the older sister Leah. And there again, he felt like he got
Ripped
off and set back and didn't get what he wanted, and all of a sudden he's playing catch up again.
Yeah. He's
And the
always-
reality of that story, and all through Genesis, is eventually Rachel was given to him too. So he had 2 wives. Jacob had 2 wives. And then if you follow their story,
Yeah.
you know, then there was competition between the wives. They would have sons. This one wasn't his sons, and all of a sudden they were barren. And then one wife would say, "Take my servant," and then Jacob would sleep with the servant and have children from there. And then the other wife was jealous, so they gave his servant, and it just spiraled. It is almost like the story was taking on its own
Yeah,
production.
it was unraveling, and they
Unraveling.
they couldn't get it
And
together.
what amazes me is in the midst of all that unraveling, so Jacob had 4 wives, and out of those 4 wives came 12 children. And that's the nation that God built that was called Israel. Dysfunction. Jacob didn't have it all put together.
No.
There was times he lied, he manipulated, he cheated his father-in-law in deals because he always felt like he was always getting the raw end. So
Yeah.
he felt that I have
Yeah.
to look after myself
Yeah, to get what God told
to
me.
get what God told me, and then you manipulate and end up
Yes.
just ruining relationships and ruining friendships and pulling distance between.
Yeah.
And that was his story all
Yeah.
along. And yet, in the midst of it, he didn't have it all together, but yet God chose
Yes.
him to
Yeah.
bear the name Israel
And God
create a nation.
was putting a plan together with all the mess.
Yes.
God wasn't
That's what amazes me.
God didn't write him off. God didn't write his wives off. God didn't write his kids off. They were all a mess. God said, you know what? I'm putting this all together. I'm going to be in your journey. I'm going to work with your
Thank
journey.
you. Thank
and
you,
I was going to
Lord.
work with your mess. And I'm going to create something so beautiful.
That
from-
just throws the notion away that you have everything put together in order for God to use you.
Yeah.
Because the story doesn't end with Jacob and his many
No.
wives and the dilemma that created in the home.
Yeah.
But that dysfunction or that mess carried on to the kids, because when you study the 12 of Jacob's children,
Yeah.
they all had issues, man. And we talked about that last week about jealousy over Joseph because Joseph was favored.
Yes.
But yet in their own decision making and in their process, they really made some very significant messes
Yes.
that created war and faction between one group from the next.
Yeah, there was.
And even in their older years, like Judah, for an example, he really screwed up.
Yeah, we can't even talk about that on here.
That's R-rated stuff.
That is R-rated, so we're
And yet, what amazes me
yes,
in this whole thing,
yes.
that doesn't mean God condones what we do.
No.
I just want to encourage you, it doesn't limit him from using us, because we often
Yes.
have been in a place of bondage where we had, like I said before, we had to be spiritually there. We had to have this together.
Yeah.
We had that together in order for
Yeah.
God to come. And what happened is, all of a sudden it alleviates the pressure that I don't have to have this in order for God to come. God's already here.
Yes.
And he values us in the process. Do we make
Yes.
right decisions? No, we don't. But God still values enough to see
Yeah.
us through, to
Yes.
understand his calling on our life.
Yes.
And as we navigate through, yes, there's consequences because of decisions we make, but those consequences still don't nullify God's purpose. So if you're in bondage today, trying to achieve something, trying to live a certain standard so that God comes and that God's presence is even more real, we want you to just relax, because his presence is here. We don't always recognize it.
Yeah.
But when we get away from this striving mentality where everything has to be in order, it alleviates the pressure and allows us to walk through the process
Yes.
to get us to where God is continually working in
Yes.
our life.
And you know what? When I began to realize that God loved walking with me in my journey, and I didn't need to perform, I didn't need to strive to actually get God to move in my life, and I wasn't going to miss out. He was not going to leave me. He was not going to, kick me to the side or give me a whooping. He was not like that.
No.
No, he was going to walk with me. And one of my big struggles was even as a worship leader, there was a lot of pressure on me that if I didn't have my ducks in a row, that God's presence wouldn't show up, and it was my fault. And I remember walking through that was really devastating, and it was many years of incredible pressure that it was my fault if God didn't show up for you. It was my fault. It was because I was doing something wrong. I didn't spend enough time with Jesus. I didn't pray hard enough. I didn't declare something. It was on me. And I remember I was feeling crushed under the pressure, just like Jacob. that I was going to miss out, and I was going to make people miss out on what God had for them because I was not measuring up. And I remember when God began to show me and challenge and break that belief system, because it held me in. I could not enjoy my walk with God. I couldn't enjoy time of worship. It was all pressure. And when Holy Spirit says no, I am present. It doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter, but it wasn't reliant on me to bring him. He's here. And sometimes I wasn't aware of it. But when I began to break that mindset of, I'm going to miss out because of me, Jesus says, no.
I too
Yeah.
had that pressure in other ways as a pastor,
Yeah.
leading a church for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I too put a lot of pressure on me.
Yeah.
The reason why something didn't happen Sunday morning, or if something didn't take place, the responsibility was mine, because first of all, I didn't start it. I didn't, I didn't promote it. I didn't do all these things. And so I'm the hindrance for God moving in the church. And I'm the hindrance from people experience the presence of God. And so we walk through that tremendous pressure.
Yeah.
And then we put pressure on other people because we expected
Because
them.
we believed it.
Because our mindset was, you have to be right. You have to live right. You have to have your right thoughts, right theology, right stuff.
Yeah.
And then we would put pressure on other people.
Yes.
Not necessarily that was our purpose, but we felt it was necessary for us to experience God. And so we would put pressure. And I remember when I began to just get to a point in my life where my head was just spinning, I thought, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I cannot do it anymore.
Yes.
And then, too, and my encounter with God, too, was, you're not going to miss it, Jeff.
No.
And for so many years, I thought I was going to miss it. And I told my wife this many times, on my tombstone, it's going to see, he just couldn't reach it.
Yeah, you told
And
me that.
that's how I felt.
Yes.
I just wasn't good enough. I couldn't reach it.
Yeah.
And that's often what was communicated.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them for communicating that, because they were under that mindset too many times.
Yep.
And they created that pressure. And so what a freedom has come when we release that pressure, when we begin to value people for who they are in process.
In their journey.
And what we want to do is we want to leave you 3 important points, I think, for us to understand that if we want to help you free yourself from those types of expectations and bondages.
Yes.
Again, this is not to negate that we shouldn't change, or that we shouldn't strive in the sense of working on character flaws and things like that. This is to alleviate that alone will not bring God's presence.
No.
He values us in the journey.
And you know what? You know what's so cool? When I began to believe in the goodness of God, that everything he is, I have.
Yes.
Because he's already given it. He's already completed the work. I don't have to do work for him to get it. He's already given it. And it's the same for you.
Yes.
Your history has been cleared. You have been forgiven. You are approved of. God is with you now. He is in you now. There's nothing you can do to change that. But when you begin to believe it,
And live with that awareness.
yes,
It changes your
believe
perspective.
it, and then you can begin to experience it because you know it's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
3 things we want to leave you here this morning.
Yes.
That helps you navigate your life through. And when it helps you navigate your life through, you're able to help other people navigate their life through without having this pressure that they have to perform and have to have a certain production come out of them in order for God to move and work. And
That's
the first thing, out of Genesis 25 all the way to Genesis 50,
Read it.
all through those chapters. It's phenomenal, because it will open your eyes to see that God uses us while we're in process.
Yes, he does.
None of those people that God used had anything put together.
A lot
They
of
were in process. Even King David, in which the Bible tells us that he was a man after God's own heart.
Yes.
He had issues in his own life.
Yeah.
And yet it was through those experiences that he learned things about himself and discovered things about God that shifted his thinking, and he was able to realign himself to the destiny God called him to. First thing that we want to leave you with this morning, this great, cool Sunday morning, is we have to understand we have to alleviate the pressure.
Yeah.
You don't have to have it all together in order for God to do something in and around your life.
That's such a good one.
It's incredible. Again,
such a good one.
read through Genesis 25 all the way through the end of the book,
And
50.
it's gonna give you some joy in the journey.
Absolutely.
Before you're
Yes.
all healed up or have it all together. It's gonna
And
give
it's
you
even going to give
joy.
you points where you're going to
Yes.
actually laugh. You're going to see
Yes.
the silliness sometimes when our perspective is
Yes.
so crooked that we end
Yeah.
up going a direction.
Yeah.
It's like, really?
Yeah. You know,
But that's again gives us hope in our
yes,
process.
Yes. So I'm saying, like, I had a picture of a balloon being blown up because of the pressure. And sometimes we don't even know how to alleviate the pressure, so we just let it squeak out. But you know what? Eventually, the balloon is either going to blow up or you're going to have to alleviate the pressure because we're actually not meant to live under it. So alleviate the pressure.
Alleviate the pressure.
Yes.
Alleviate the pressure in your life.
Yeah.
You don't have to have it all together.
Yes.
The beauty of it is God's there with us in the journey
Yes.
to help us make adjustments along the way
Yeah.
because it's not healthy just to stay there. We have to
No.
always be growing.
Yes.
But when we're growing with the understanding that we're valued in the journey,
Yes.
that we're worth God showing up and
I
worth God
love
doing
that.
stuff in the journey,
Yes.
then it gives hope.
Yes.
It gives hope.
You are not going to miss out.
Absolutely. Releasing the pressure.
Yep.
Release the pressure.
Number-
Don't live under that. Number 2.
Yep.
It's necessary to learn to give grace in people's journey.
You know what? That feels hard, especially if you have that mindset when you haven't alleviated the pressure in your own life. It's really hard to give grace to other people in their journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
That's
is-
why I say when you alleviate your pressure and your
Yes.
value is not determined on your performance,
Yes.
you tend to relieve the pressure of other people.
And here's that grace word again. Grace does that. When you give grace in other people's journey, it's going to alleviate the pressure on them.
Absolutely.
And it gives them a picture of God. I'm telling you, God is full of grace. That is
I
who
don't think
He
we
is.
can emphasize that enough.
No.
We are examples
Yes.
of God's grace.
Yeah. Wow.
And it is changing our perspective. It's
Yes.
changing how we view Him. It's changing how we view others. It's
Yes.
changing how we navigate through things.
Yeah.
And there's still a little bit of I have to work through my mindset. There's still
Yeah.
a little bit of I have to have everything together.
Yes.
And then I know when I go down that road, peace is gone and I put pressure on other people.
Yes.
And I want, listen to me, I want God to be God and honor you in your process. And as you let God be God, you're going to see an aspect of God, His greatness and His grace come alive in you.
Yes.
And it's going to change you.
Yes.
It's going to change you.
Yes.
The third thing that we want to leave with you this morning too, and we'll end with that, is don't let your present reality be your final destination.
Don't settle down with your belief system as you are.
Look at Jacob, how his life transformed and changed as God showed up in his life, revealed things to him. How
Yes.
God showed up in the children of Israel's life, the 10 brothers, the 12 brothers, and how God began to show Himself in their journeys.
Yes.
And how it revolutionized how they went from that point on.
You know what? Can we just say about Jacob's journey, because he lived as Jacob and he lived under that belief system of I'm behind and I have to manipulate and earn what God has for me, until he had an encounter where he was wrestling with God.
He was.
Have you ever wrestled with God? We have. Because when there's a mindset that challenges you, I got to get God to do something for me, we wrestle with that mindset. Well, God broke through that day and He changed his name. And
from Jacob to Israel.
Yes.
Because you are going to be a father of many nations.
wow.
And that's what happened in Jacob's life.
Yes.
His present reality was
Yes.
not his final
Yes.
destination.
Yeah.
Your present reality
Yes.
is not your final destination.
And God wants to change that identity over you and break through those things that have held you hostage and made you settle down there. He's like, oh no.
How often have we settled down there? We just
Yes.
accepted that that's the truth. And when you accept that as the truth in your life, you don't move from on that. That's why
That's
it's
right.
important to understand
Yes.
that your present reality isn't your final destination.
Yes. And one thing that Israel actually means too is triumphant with God. It's like we're going on, that thing is behind me, and I'm not behind anymore. I recognize what God has done, who He said I am, in the process.
That's right. We want to leave you
That's-
here this morning. Again, we encourage you to go through Genesis 25 all the way to chapter 50, and you
Yes.
see the story of Jacob's life unfolded and how his family and God's destiny and plan on his life
Yeah.
was all through his journey. And we just want to give you hope. Thank you for joining with us this
Yes.
morning. We honor you,
Yes.
and we just pray God's blessing upon your life.
Yes.
And again, your present circumstances don't hold you back.
That's
Your
right.
destiny is
That's right.
given and birthed by God.
Yeah.
And He wants to walk you through
Yes.
every step of the way. Thank you. Have
That's
a great
awesome.
Sunday
Have a
morning.
great
We'll
Sunday.
see you next week.